Facebook interview with Vaseem Khan, the author of the Inspector Chopra series involving the Vulture Club. If you could just introduce it for us, Vaseem, and tell us all about the book, please.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for inviting me on, and thank you to your group listeners for tuning in. So for those of you who don't know me, I write a crime series set in modern India. It's called the Baby Ganesh Agency series, featuring, as Alex mentioned, Inspector Chopra, who is in his late 40s. He retires from the Bombay police force due to a health issue. And on his last day in office, he, as well as inheriting a case that nobody else wants to look at, the murder of a local boy, a poor boy, in Mumbai, he also inherits a 1-year-old baby elephant. And that sets us up for the first book in the series, which is The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra. It's this one, if you've never seen it before. And by the end of that first book, he solved the murder, obviously, but he's also set up his own detective agency, which he calls the Baby Ganesh Agency. And then in the subsequent books, he solves different various crimes. And we're up to book 5, which is, as you mentioned, the Bad Day at the Vulture Club. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more later on.
Yeah, I've just finished reviewing it, actually, and I was really interested in the Parsi angle that you took. Why did you choose that?
Well, I mean, I suppose I should just say why I write these particular novels. I mean, I write these because I lived in India for a decade in my 20s, and I had never been to India. My parents were from the subcontinent, but I didn't get there until the age of 23, and I spent 10 years working there. And a lot of when I got back to the UK, I wanted to showcase India as I found it, because we're a little bit guilty in the West of sometimes mythologizing India, turning it into the best exotic marigold hotel where everybody's happy, and even movies like Slumdog Millionaire, which portray even beggars as being reasonably happy with their lot. But the truth is that there's a lot of inequality in India. There's caste prejudice, there's religious turbulence, and these things mean that the environment, although there's lots of wonderful aspects to it, there's plenty of dark aspects to it as well. And so what I've tried to do with this series is try to create that balanced viewpoint of modern India, and use the crime stories as a vehicle to showcase these aspects of India. And Bad Day at the Vulture Club, the 5th in the series now, is, as you said, set in the Parsi community of India, and the Parsis are a very small but influential section of the Indian fabric. And they are originally from Persia. They're not Hindus, they're not Muslims, they don't bury or cremate their dead. Instead, they leave their dead out in stone structures called Towers of Silence, which are in a wooded area in the middle of Bombay. And they leave them for vultures to eat. And it's a process called excarnation. And I met a Parsi when I was living in India, and I became fascinated with this, with the community that I knew nothing about. And so I decided that, this 5th book, we'd have a murder of an influential Parsi, and then Chopra would go in and solve the murder, but he'd also investigate this. He'd also learn a lot about this community.
When you were deciding on the angle to go for, why did you choose Ganesh as a character to back Chopra up?
Well, so I mean, I should be clear to people who don't know the books. Ganesha is a 1-year-old baby elephant that's been sent to Chopra by his long-lost uncle, and he has to find a way to accommodate it. He lives on the 15th floor of a tower block, as many middle-class people in India do. He lives with his wife, whose name is Poppy, and they've been together for years. They don't have children, so one reason that they decide to look after this baby elephant is because it fills a void in their lives. The reason that I chose the elephant is I don't expect anyone to take the elephant literally. It's not, it doesn't fly, it doesn't talk, it doesn't solve the mysteries. It occasionally gets involved, but it's really there as a symbol, a metaphor for India. And it allows me to add some gentle humor in between the grisly crimes and Chopra, who's a serious man, and these depictions of India that I was talking about, the sort of darker aspects of the country. And why I chose a baby elephant as opposed to anything else? Well, when I first went to India, one of the first things that I saw when I was moving from the airport to my hotel was this enormous grey Indian elephant in the middle of traffic. And it's something that you can never see in the UK. I mean, I grew up in East London, and that's where I live now since moving back from India. And, that sight just stayed with me, so that I just decided to put that into a crime novel and see if I could get away with it. And it seemed to have worked.
You seem to have a network of writers now with the Red Hot Chili writers thing. What made you come up with that, and how is that going?
So you're referring to the podcast that
Yeah.
I'm involved with, called the Red Hot Chili Writers Podcast. And okay, so I spent 23 years trying to get published, Alex. I wrote 7 different novels across different genres, and I collected 200 odd rejection letters. So I never expected to get published with this Baby Ganesh Agency series, and I was as amazed as anyone else when Hodder gave me a 4-book deal, and the first book, The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, became a Times bestseller, and it's now been printed into 15 different languages. And the last 5 years have been a learning experience for me, because I entered the industry as someone of an outsider. There are not many people from my background, a British Asian, who are writing crime fiction. I mean, hardly anyone. And once I came in, a few others, friends of mine, people that people like Abir Mukherjee and Amit Dand, they've also been published since then. And because there were so few of us from this background writing crime fiction, we became friends. We got in touch with each other, and we became friends. And then we decided that a podcast would be a good vehicle, not to talk about diversity in the industry really, but to try and use that as a cultural bridge. So we bring our experiences to the podcast, but the podcast it's meant to be a light-hearted look at writing, at creativity, at movies. And we interview some of the best crime writers in the country on the podcast, the likes of Anne Cleve and Ruth Ware and Claire McIntosh. We've just interviewed Mike Craven, who won last year's CWA Gold Dagger, and he'll be on a couple of episodes from now. So our aim is to really just take a light-hearted look at the industry and to try and use that as a vehicle to talk about our own rather different experiences of coming into the industry.
As a university lecturer, what inspiration could you take from that, because you work in the criminology side of things?
Well, you're right. Yeah, since coming back from India, I work at the UCL Jules Dando Institute of Crime Science, and a lot of what we're doing is looking at ways of using science and engineering to reduce crime. So we're particularly busy at the moment because there's been a massive spike in cyber-related crime due to the lockdown and lots more people being online. So I'd urge all of our listeners to try and be as safe as you possibly can online. I don't actually do a lot of lecturing. Most of my time is spent, because I'm not a formal academic, my time is spent managing academics, managing research projects, and trying to make sure that we've got lots of money for those things, and that we deliver the sort of research that we said we would.
The Chopra series is not the only idea you've got. You've got a new one coming up, haven't you?
Yes, so there's 5 books and 2 novellas in the Baby Ganesh, the Chopra series, and I felt it was time for a bit of a change. Like most writers, after a few years of doing a set of characters, you like to challenge yourself. So my next book, that's due out in August, is called Midnight at Malabar House. It's the first book in this Malabar House series, and it's again set in Bombay, but in 1950 in Bombay. So it's historical crime, and it features India's first female police detective. Her name is Persis Wadia, and I have her joining the police force as the lone female detective in the Indian police service. So she's operating in a sea of misogyny. None of the male senior police officers want her around, but she's breaking boundaries, and she is called upon to investigate the murder of a prominent British diplomat in Bombay in 1950. And the period is incredibly interesting to me anyway, because it's just a few years after partition, it's just a few years after independence and Gandhi's assassination. And what a lot of people don't realize is that all the foreigners didn't leave in 1947 when independence happened. There are tens of thousands of Brits still living in India, and a lot of them in Bombay. So Bombay was an incredibly cosmopolitan, interesting city at that period of time. And so I thought I would explore that by means of introducing this new character and this new series.
Is there any scope for going earlier than the 50s, or is that just what you chose to go for?
Sorry, did you ask me, is the series set earlier than?
Is there any scope for going earlier than the 50s, later, do you think?
No, because my aim is to try and showcase that period that is not really looked at very much, because we have books that are set in the Raj era, and my good friend Abir Mukherjee, he writes a brilliant series, a Sam Wyndham series, which is set in the 1920s in Calcutta, and it really explores that whole Raj dynamic. But we very, very rarely look at just the post-independence period in India, mainly because the Brits had largely left the country, or the Raj had ended. And so it's not really been explored well in fiction. So my focus is to try and bring a light to this period and give people an idea of what it was really like there.
What do you think that you might end up doing with that series that's different to the Ganesh one?
Well, it's more of a straight crime series, so there's no baby elephants or anything of that nature. There's still a note of humor, but it's a very wry humor, and it's mainly through Persis's father, whose name is Sam Wadia, and he runs a bookshop, and they live above the bookshop. She lost her mother at a young age during the Quit India movement, and Sam is a very cynical man. He lost the use of his legs during the Quit India movement, and he brings some wry humor to the books, but it's much more straight historical crime narratives. And at the moment, I'm working on the second in the series. It's called The Dying Day, and it's based around the theft of a 700-year-old copy of Dante's The Divine Comedy, which for the last 200 years has been held in Bombay's Asiatic Society. So these are all facts. And in the 1930s, Mussolini tried to buy this copy of The Divine Comedy back for Italy, and the Indian government refused. And so it's still there in the Asiatic Society. It's under lock and key, obviously, but occasionally they bring it out for display. And so in 1950, in my story, in the second book that I'm halfway through writing, this disappears, and Persis is called in to investigate. And as she does so, murders and things occur, and we get dragged into the mystery of why this book has gone missing and who may have taken it.
Going back to festivals and things like the one we had last month. Thanks for doing that as well, by the way. You did Harrogate last year, I believe. How was that? Because I know lots of authors like to go there.
Well, so I mean, after 20 odd years of not, you don't expect to get published. Over the last 5 years, I've pretty much been lucky enough to have ticked all of the boxes that I might have dreamed about when I was younger. So I've had a Times bestseller. I've had foreign translations and great reviews in the national newspapers. But the thing that I've enjoyed more than anything else, and this is the honest truth, having waited for so long to be published, is going all around the country to big festivals, small festivals, big events, small events, and talking face to face with readers. And that engagement, I think, is possibly the worst part of the lockdown, not being able to have that one-on-one engagement or engagement with an audience, that back and forth. It isn't quite the same, but so thank you to people like yourselves for getting us at least some way of speaking to readers. And Harrogate is the pinnacle for most crime authors. It's the world's biggest crime event. It's an honor to be invited, and it was great. You're in a room full of nearly 800 people, and you're able to speak with other great authors on the panel, and it was a terrific time. Yeah.
What have you been doing to keep yourself sane in lockdown?
It's quite difficult, isn't it? It's quite difficult. I mean, the first couple of weeks we've all got our enthusiasm, and then gradually the enthusiasm ebbs away. And I think that I'm at that point now where I'm trying to stick to a routine. So it's harder. It gets harder and harder. So at the beginning, the first couple of days, I got up, did the shower, put on my clothes as if I was going to work, and then sat down at my machine. And now I sort of just roll out of bed, crawl on my hands and knees to the computer, and just switch it on and leave the video off. So it's harder and harder, I think, as time goes by. It's not natural for us to generally be so confined at home, especially when the sun is shining. We'd all like to take a little, go outside for a bit.
Has it affected the podcast at all?
No, not really, because the podcast is generally recorded online. I mean, the only thing that's missing perhaps is that because Abir's mother usually appears, and we would often record at her flat in Stratford. That's not been possible because she's under lockdown, so we can't really go in and visit her and record in her. So I can't really get free food anymore out of Abir's mum, which is the biggest, probably the biggest issue with lockdown. You seem to have frozen there for a second, so I'm not really sure what I should do. Should I do a song and dance number?
It's frozen. I'm sorry about that. There's some questions on the screen. If I pop them up, do you want to have a go at answering those?
Am I still live?
Yeah, you're still live. Yeah.
Okay, so whoever's tuned in, we're having some technical issues, but in the meantime, why don't I answer a couple of these questions in the chat?
Can you see this one up on the screen?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions from Lynn Brown. She says, why do I put up with Abir Mukherjee? I don't know, Lynn. I honestly don't know. No, we both agreed a long time ago that, our podcast would, he'd be the one who's allowed to crack more jokes on the podcast, because you can't have two funny guys on there. You have to have a straight person as well. But he's a lovely chap, isn't he? So that's the reason I put up with him.
Hello again, guys. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right, Alex. What's up? What's next?
Can you see the questions?
Yeah. I've answered Lynn, so I know Lynn Brown quite well. So.
If you wouldn't mind reading a couple of them off, because I'm dyslexic and I can't read them off. So if you won't mind.
The questions? Do you mean the questions?
The questions, if there's any out there in the audience from people.
Yeah, well, Lynn asks, have Abir and I been offered TV like Ant and Dec? No, it would be great if we were, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I mean, Abir might have crashed his car while in his cups when he'd had a bit too much whiskey, but everyone seems to have forgiven and for doing that. So, or was it Dec? I don't know. I don't even know the difference between the pair of them, to be honest with you. They're both interchangeable.
Well, you couldn't really have that without Abir's mum, could you? I mean, she's part of the fabric of it, isn't she? Yeah.
I think that's it, really, in terms of questions. Well, what's this? Will you ever set your novels outside of India? At the moment, it doesn't look like it, because I'm under contract with Hodder for 3 books in the current Malabar House series, which will keep me busy for the next couple of years at least. I do have other books that I would like to see published, one which I'd previously written, which was set in Egypt, and another one which I'd like to write, but that would all depend on getting a publishing contract for those books.
What was it about Egypt and that made you want to write there as well?
Well, I mean, I love I love ancient history, so I'm a huge ancient history buff anyway. And I've visited Egypt a number of times, spent time there because I worked in the Middle East for a very short while after my India stint. And for me, what I tried to do was write this big literary novel, which was something like 220,000 words, the first draft, covering three generations of an Egyptian family from the 1890s to the 1970s, which is an incredibly fascinating period of Egyptian history. And unfortunately, I couldn't get anywhere with it because nobody's going to publish a 220,000 word first novel, because this was back when I was unpublished. And since then, it's been lying in my drawer, and every couple of years I take it out and I tinker with it, and I've managed to get it down to about 140,000 words now. So in another year, I might have it ready to send out to an agent. So I think this is one of those things where, any budding writers in the group, nothing is wasted. Even if it never gets published, the process of writing those 220,000 words and crafting them and reworking sentences and characters and plot strands meant that over 3 years, and that's how long it took me to do that, my writing improved, to an enormous degree. So everything that you write, every completed novel that you write, actually helps you to get closer to that point where your writing prose is good enough, your plotting is good enough, your characterization is good enough for you to be able to write a book that hopefully might actually get published.
Have you got any kind of ideas whether you might do other genres or anything like that?
Well, that's a literary novel, and I love literary fiction, so I'm certainly hoping that I'll be able to get something published in that literary / contemporary fiction genre. So contemporary is now often associated with a lot of contemporary humorous fiction. So, you've got the likes of or books that are called uplit. Have you heard that term, uplit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that a lot of contemporary fiction is now in that uplit category. A Man Called Over, Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. Both great books that I recently read. So I would like to write something in that genre as well, because I quite like using humor in writing anyway. So I think it would suit me quite well to do something in that. I just need to hit on the right idea.
You mentioned uplift and things. What authors that have written that you would recommend to the group?
Well, the two books I've just mentioned, A Man Called Over and Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, are terrific. I also read this recently, which is called The Cactus, and that's quite good. That was a big hit, and it's a very well-written uplit novel. It's about a woman who, at the age of, I think, 40 or 45, she finds that she's pregnant. She doesn't have a steady relationship. And she's also in a battle. Her mother passes, and she's in a battle with her brother for control of the house. But it's very well written, and it's quite funny, and it's a wry, very dry humor.
In your interviews on the Red Hot Chili, have you seen any crossover? Because you're saying about the possibility crime would cross over into literature.
Well, this is a big debate, isn't it, in the industry over the last 5 years in particular. And I think it's come about because perhaps a few literary writers were a little bit snobbish about crime fiction. And a part of me thinks, that's unfair. Crime fiction is the world's most popular genre now. And there's a reason for it, because people enjoy reading crime fiction books. And at the end of the day, most writing should be geared towards creating a book that people actually want to read. Now, I don't mind 700-page dense literary novels if they're really interesting and they keep the pages turning. There's nothing wrong with that. I love reading, some of the Booker shortlist every year, for instance. But I don't think that it's right to be snobbish about crime fiction. And I think that there are crime fiction books that are written occasionally that are approaching literary fiction. And just because they happen to have a murder or something like that at their heart, it doesn't mean that they are not top draw fiction.
My Sister the Serial Killer is a prime example of that. It's on the Fictions list this year.
Sorry, which book was that?
My Sister the Serial Killer.
Yeah, that's been nominated for a lot of top awards around the world, hasn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, that's shorter than average. Have you ever thought about writing shorter yourself?
Well, there are two novellas in the Baby Ganesh, the Chopra series. One is 30,000 words and one is shorter than that. I enjoyed writing those, but I think for me, a full-length novel gives you the scope to be able to really tell your story properly. With a novella, you generally have to eject quite a lot of material. You can't have a complex plot, you can't have too many characters, and you've got to get to the point. So there's no room to really describe things in a narrative fashion.
Novellas and shorter things. I know you were saying that you'd been up for an award with those. How did that go and stuff?
Well, I've won a few awards for the Chopra series, and it's another one of those tick boxes that you get and you think, okay, great, I've got this lovely thing, this plaquey thing that I can now say that great, I've won an award for my fiction. But the truth is that there are very, very few awards in the world in literature that make a massive impact on an author's career, and that's just the truth. So winning the Booker Prize or winning maybe the CWA Gold Dagger, things of that nature make a significant impact on your sales and your publicity, so that it really matters. The rest are they're just nice. They're nice to have.
Is there any other questions out there in the group that anyone wants to ask? Well, I'll wait for one to come.
Well, Carolyn's asked, who would play Chopra in the TV adaptation? So that's an interesting question, because the book's been under option for a number of years, and it's a question that keeps getting debated by myself and fans of the book, fans of the series. Well, one of the people I'd have loved to have played it a few years ago was an Indian actor called Irfan Khan, who has appeared in crossover movies such as Slumdog Millionaire, The Lunchbox, one of the Jurassic Park movies. But unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, he passed away at a relatively young age. He was only in, I think, his early 50s. So at the moment, I really don't know who would. I know who wouldn't. Ben Kingsley. He played Gandhi, but I think that's about it. I think we'd probably choose a proper Indian. Although I think Ben Kingsley is actually half Indian, maybe.
What made you go for Chopra at retirement age instead of younger?
Well, I didn't really. I wanted him to be old enough to have had lots of experience in Bombay and the Mumbai police force in particular. So I didn't want to make him in his 20s or 30s. He needed to be, because he's a very serious man, and he cares deeply about justice, and that takes time to build up that that appreciation of the things that people can get away with in India if they have money and influence. And he spent 30 years in the police force because he joined as a 17-year-old cadet. But I didn't want him to be too old either. I didn't want him to be retiring at 65, because he's a man who's if necessary, he gets into the physical action side of things in these plots. And you need a lot of energy to look after a baby elephant as well. So that's.
I've loved the relationship between him and his wife Poppy. What made you decide on that? Because it's very, very different than stuff.
Yeah, so we often see in Western fiction, our detectives are mavericks, and they're chain smoking, semi-comatose drunks. They've been divorced 3 times, etc., etc. So I didn't want to go down that route. I wanted to create a character who stands for justice, who's very upright and honest, and these values are part of his code that he lives by. Because he's in an environment, the police service in India is known for being corrupt in general or incompetent, and he stands as an opposite to that. and he needed a partner to make sure that he over the years as somebody to balance this sea of corruption that he's wading around in. And that's what Poppy is. She has her own life, she has her own social causes. She's not the kind of person who can be controlled by anybody, so she does her own thing. But the pair of them have this very strong bond over the years.
You mentioned Enclaves, and I thought that was interesting because she writes multiple series. So do you think you're going back to Chopra and the new series at the same time, or?
It all depends on time, availability of time. It also depends on what Hodder, my publisher, want. So there's lots of factors that go into things like that. I mean, Anne is obviously at the very top of the industry now, so she can call her shots and do what she likes. I'm not quite there, so I do have to listen to what my publisher wants.
I think we're getting close to time, actually. If anyone else has got any questions out there that you might want to ask, now's the time.
Well, I hope your listeners, at any rate, are and people in the group are, surviving this lockdown as best as they can. It isn't easy, but reading books is one way to get through it. And I've been doing a lot more reading since I've been at home than the previous 6 months. So my to be read pile has gone down considerably, and some brilliant books I've discovered in that pile. So there are some benefits. There is a silver lining, I suppose.
What have you recently read in your to be read part that you'd recommend to people?
Well, some of them have been books that I read many years ago, and I've been rereading. So, for instance, Robert Harris's Fatherland, which is one of the best crime novels that have ever been written in this country. And for those of you who don't know, it's set in 1964, and it assumes that Germany didn't lose the war, so there's a greater German empire in Europe. Hitler is still alive, and a German SS police officer he encounters a murder of an old man, and as he investigates, he starts going into the dark heart of the Nazi past. It's brilliant.
I think that the idea of an alternative universe crime novel gives extra scope. What do you think somebody would do with a Indian scope if they decided to do that?
Well, I love science fiction. One of my earliest attempt to write was science fiction short stories. Never got published though. So I read a lot of science fiction. So this was perfect. This was a blend of crime and alternate history, as you said. If you did it in India, oh my God, India's history is 9,000 years old. So you imagine you could pick any point within that because it's such a vast place. It's absolutely massive. There would be so many points where you could really do an alternate history version of India. So, for instance, you could do an alternate history where the British didn't leave India in 1947. What would India look like today if Britain was still in charge? That could be one very controversial way of looking at India.
I'd just be fascinated by that. I think very controversial, as you say.
Maybe I should write.
Yeah. What about if India had colonized England? It's just asked.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't hear.
What if India had just colonized England? Yeah. If you did
I mean, you mean now? Because they couldn't have done it back then. They just didn't have the power. I mean, the funny thing is that India was one of the wealthiest countries in the world before the East India Company arrived. But by the time the British left in 1947, its wealth had fallen by 80 or 90 or some ridiculously large percentage. I don't think India has never really been a colonizing country. If you look at the history of the subcontinent, you haven't really seen waves of people emerge from India to try and conquer neighboring territories. It's just not part of the Hindu, generally the Hindu psyche. So people have come into India from various different empires to try and conquer swathes of India, but the Indians haven't really done it. So I don't really see them changing that mentality. Britain's safe. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Vaseem. It's been great talking to you.
Alex, it's been lovely as usual chatting to you, and thank you so much for taking the effort to bring me onto your little video cast. And best wishes again to everybody in the group, and keep reading.
Thank you.